You are listening to the Smart Betting Club podcast with me, your host, Peter Ling. Now, this podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange, and you can find out more on what they offer smart bettors over at matchbook.com. And if you are interested in learning more what it takes to make a profit betting, please do check out my service for winning bettors over at smartbettingclub.com. Today, I'm speaking with someone making serious waves in the smart betting space. David Hipkin is the co-founder of Sharp Betting, a platform built on years of profitable data-led betting. Launched in 2024 with fellow professional bettor Chris Forset, Sharp Betting is all about helping everyday bettors adopt a sharp, high-turnover approach backed by numbers. Sharp Betting was also the feature review in our latest SBC magazine, so it is the perfect time to dive deeper. And with that, let me welcome David to the chat. David, it's great to have you on. How are you?
Very good, Pete. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Nice to speak to you again.
Yes, indeed, because I've been on your betting blog before and we've interacted in the past a fair bit, but I think people probably don't know your full journey in the betting industry, and I think you've got quite an interesting background. Do you want to explain that, expand upon what your role in the betting world?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for 3 hours about that, but obviously nobody wants to hear that. But I started as a boxing trader around 2000, and I was working for a spread betting firm, and I got to trade all the big fights in Vegas, and we had Mike Tyson and Lennox was still knocking about. So it was essentially my dream job, having tried the rat race. I worked in the city for about 6 months, and it really was not for me. And then, yes, I moved into spread betting, and from doing the boxing trading, I did that for a good couple of years. But back then, it was very much a niche sport, and the sort of dream job vibe didn't last very long. So I moved quite soon into a product development role. But it was the experience of trading the big fights to big stakes on the fly and having to gain confidence in that sort of trading environment that led me to product development and sort of know how to develop products from a betting perspective.
And that obviously has helped shape Sharp Betting. But in terms of shaping your betting experience, I guess trading boxing events where a lot of money is coming in a very short space of time must have taught you quite a lot about trading and how to make a profit, both as a bookmaker and also as a punter.
Oh, absolutely. And even to this day, 25 years on, there were still bets that I saw come in I've seen nothing like since. So there were upsides and downsides to that. The upside was the exposure to having to really learn quickly and feel that pressure. The downside was that I would sometimes make a decent amount of profit for a big fight. I think Lennox went the distance with David Tour for any fight fans out there. And that was one of our best boxing events ever. But it could be wiped out within one or two bets from a big punter coming on and staking huge amounts. So, there were certainly ebbs and flows of, I wouldn't call it variance, but just sort of dealing with what I considered a successful night's boxing as opposed to what some of these guys were willing to bet back then.
I suppose as well, boxing was all built towards, especially back then, would have been just built towards Saturday night events. So one or two really big fights alongside a normal card. So a little bit different to the traditional trading where, like they say football or tennis, where there's hundreds of games every day.
Yeah, but part of my sort of passion for doing it back then was to cover all the fights at York Hall, Bethnal Green. And if it was televised anywhere, I wanted to offer odds on it. So it wasn't just about waiting for the Mike Tyson and the Lennox show, but it was the smaller fights as well. But absolutely, the big fights was where all the money came in, and we did not see much business on the smaller fights.
Sure. Before we get on to talk about Sharp Betting and your work there and your own betting, but what is it that got you into it in the first place? You mentioned there you worked in the city, but did you have somebody in your life that was from a betting background, or was it just a love of numbers? What was your motivation, inspiration into joining the betting world?
It's multifaceted, really. But my mother was into the stock market, and she would invest and follow the FTSE. And my father was a very good sportsman, so we'd always watch sport together. And we'd have gentlemen's bets on what's going to happen. And as a family, we would, without fail, bet on the Grand National. That was a sort of family tradition. And even sort of a family evening at home for us might involve a game of roulette, or a card game, and we'd play for matchsticks. So there was always sort of games and a little bit of sort of fun betting and stuff like that involved. And for me, it was the only thing I was ever good at school was maths. And so it was kind of sort of a natural thing that, given the upbringing I had in that sort of environment, with a propensity to be sort of analytical and good at maths, that it was kind of inevitable that I would end up doing this. It was just fortunate that the industry was booming while I was working for a stockbroker, and I was able to sort of pivot away into sports betting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening probably have the same experience, that love of numbers and the fact that betting was just taking off, especially online betting during the time that we got involved. And well, I want to ask you then about the sharp betting. That's your platform. Well, what does sharp betting mean to you? I mean, probably listeners are wondering, what does that actually mean? Is it's using models, numbers, and strategy rather than form studies, let's say, or a traditional approach where someone might, like a horse racing punter might watch races, might study the form. Can you break that down in terms of what it means to you and how you would explain it to somebody listening?
Yeah, well, I think all those things you mentioned are versions of being sharp. But for me, in simple terms, a sharp bettor simply has an edge over the market, whatever that market might be, and however that edge manifests itself. But the most important thing, though, is that the edge is useless if you can't exploit it. So the most important thing for a sharp betting visitor to our website is not just the edge that we provide them with through our football model, but the tools in which we inform our members how to best exploit that edge and exploit it into the long term. Because there's no point having an edge that brings you great success and it only brings you success for 3 days. We want to have success 6 months down the line, a year down the line, even further. So for me, sharp betting is that umbrella term of how you've come about this edge and what you do to maximize it and exploit it into the long term.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I was talking to somebody recently about greyhound betting and they were saying, they've got an edge. I was like, well, how are you going to get on? And how are you going to continue to get on?
Yeah.
Because it's a theoretical edge in many instances. And you might relate the same thing to horse racing these days, especially like overnight horse racing. It's very easy for someone to pick out a mispriced horse at 6 p.m. the night before racing, but can you do it consistently, or will bookmakers let you get on? So yeah, it's a really important facet of I think, from our perspective of reviewing, to make sure that a theoretical approach, but also a practical approach.
Absolutely. And also with the practicality of the whole, there's no magic wand that says, if I follow these steps, I will be able to get my bets on in 6 months' time. We know our edge works, and that's sort of proven over time. But to the things that we'll talk a little bit more detail later about, sort of camouflaging activity and so on, the actual material upside of doing those things is a little bit unproven. It's worth doing them, but how much longevity you get on the back of them is less scientific than the edge itself, although I do believe they are very important.
They are indeed. So we obviously going to talk about your sharp betting platform, but prior to that, you obviously were and have been a successful bettor, and worked with Chris Forset, your co-founder, and you built up an incredible track record working on the sharp betting kind of model. But how did you first team up, and what strengths do each of you bring to the sharp betting platform?
It's fun to start talking about Chris and my relationship now. People sort of know a little bit more about us both. We went to school together, so we've been friends since we were 12 or 13 years old. And even at that age, betting was something that connected us, and Chris stood out as something really quite special even back then. So yeah, in terms of the two of us, I think in a business, you don't want too many similar personalities. And Chris and I are very different, but we do complement each other as well. And I think that the thing that we have in common most of all is a shared passion and a confidence in what we do and how we go about it. As a result, what that means in all our years as friends and business partners, we've not once had a cross word. And I'm eternally grateful for that, because one of the cliches about going into business is don't go into business with your friends. And
yeah,
I'm fortunate enough to say that Chris is not only one of the most capable people I know, but he's also one of my best friends. So I'm incredibly fortunate in that regard. Yeah, and in terms of sort of the tasks we do, obviously we speak on a daily basis. If there's a key decision to be made, we'll thrash it out online, and we tend to be on the same page and reach agreement pretty quickly. Sometimes things are quite tough to reach a decision on, so we're very laid back, and we'll take a sort of let's sleep on it approach, address it the next morning over a fresh cup of coffee, and job done, we've made a decision. And in terms of the actual sort of IP in the business, absolutely, Chris does all the modeling. How I will be involved in that side of things is essentially as a sounding board. I can understand what Chris is trying to achieve and how it will be achieved and why it works, but it's certainly all his IP. So I tend to sort of be responsible for the daily running of the business, which is always evolving as we roll out new features frequently. But it means Chris is free to build new products. And meanwhile, I handle most of sort of the customer service side of things and the onboarding processes.
Well, that seems like a good duo and good teamwork. And without getting yourself into trouble, were you like, as you went to school together, were you talking about betting or betting between yourselves as 12-year-olds? Or was that something you came back to in later life?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Chris ran a nice little casino operation. And yeah, I think I'm still friends with other people from school who still have quite a healthy credit with Chris from those days. So I don't think we're going to see that again. But on a more serious side, like even then, sort of in his mid-teens, he was getting bets on in the high street. And then, and actually back then in what would have been the mid to early 90s, there was definite kudos about this. There's certainly not kudos now, but Chris was, not allowed in a certain number of high street books back then as a teenager.
So there you go. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's you're both steeped in betting from an early age, and that obviously comes across because Chris has built the models and you've been working together. And that moves us on quite nicely because before you set up Sharp Betting as it is now as a platform, you were working together with Chris, right? You were beating the books where Chris was allowed to get in or, get online.
Yes.
On the same model that you're using now. Tell me a little bit about that.
Essentially, yeah, again, I don't want to spend too much long doing it over old news. It's history. But before we launched Sharp Betting, we had another sort of AI business doing sports commentary. And we also did sort of long form content for football previews. And it was a website called Frog the Gambler that perhaps people listening to this might even recall. But Frog the Gambler was kind of the acorn that became Sharp Betting. And it was producing previews on every single football match across the planet where there was sufficient enough data for us to have an opinion on it. And we were doing that while we were running the other business. We were doing that kind of just sort of as a side hobby for a couple of years. And we built up this huge amount of data and results for how our model was performing.
Yeah.
And so we decided we needed to actually have it sit there having, thousands of hits from across the globe and us not actually profiting from it. We decided to start betting on it. So I was sort of user number one. And 1 August, a couple of years ago, I set up 5 accounts. I put 50 quid in each of them. And I diarized every single thing I did for 3 or 4 months and the variance I went on and the highs and the lows. And, I started at the end of August. So my first week betting was first week of September. By Christmas, I'd made £8,000 and I was betting singles only. So, and this was all with the soft books. And so, I've got great experience about when the restrictions kick in, what sort of things you can do for all the longevity that I've talked about. And so after that, after about 8,000, the restrictions were sort of coming thick and thin. So I handed over to Chris and, we had a few other sort of people who used the system. And basically, long story short, within 18 months from me being sort of bet number one in that August, 18 months later, we'd made about £200,000.
Wow.
And this was all with the soft books. So, and by that point, 18 months later, we really did not have any accounts left. So that was the point we decided, let's set up the website Sharp Betting and give this to the public, to anyone who wants it.
Wow, that's impressive. 200K with a load of soft books betting.
Yeah.
You must have been, how many hours a day were you putting in, do you think?
Well, that is something I've got to be careful how I answer that one because...
Okay. Don't get into trouble.
No, I don't want to get into trouble. So some of us bet more than others. Okay. So for me, certainly Chris was able to hit it pretty hard. For me, I wanted to maintain the lifestyle because I was blogging this in real time. So I wanted to maintain that it was not going to get in the way of my daily life. So I was sticking to sort of half an hour maximum a day. I wanted to show what could be done with just betting on your coffee break, betting when you get home from work, that sort of thing, rather than going full on. So, but this is the big thing, the difference between Chris and I, again, how we complement each other. He can have this sort of more AI genius type approach where everything I do, I want it to be relatable to the man on the street, that this isn't some, don't sit at your desk for 8 hours betting. You can if you want, but that's not what I want to do. I want to do 10 minutes a day and see how I do every, once a month, see if I'm winning or losing.
No, and that's a really good point. And I think that's, again, goes back to the practicality and the theoretical, because as much as someone listening to this who might be enjoy betting would like to bet a lot for a living, do that as a job, realistically, they probably have another job or other commitments, and betting has to fit in around that. So, and staking too, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. But, obviously you don't want to go too much into the background, but I think it's really important because, sometimes when people set it up or have a tipping service, people say, well, why don't you just bet on it yourself? And why are you doing it? And it gives that motivation as well as an understanding of your experience and the fact you've done this and the pitfalls and the strengths and weaknesses of this approach.
And Pete, that is literally point number one. 1.A in our FAQs is people think it's a gotcha to say, if it works, why would you sell it? And the reason we sell it is because it works and we can't use it anymore. If it didn't work, we'd still be trying to get it to work, and we're still, so that we can't literally use it. The reason I was being a little bit sketchy about my answer sort of a couple of minutes ago is that for us, we never even considered the idea of multi-accounting. So I know it's something of a grey area, and some people might even say it's not even a grey area anymore. At the point we were getting restricted, a natural pivot might have been to obviously go into multi-accounting, but we decided not to do that and instead set up the site. So, everything we've done since we set up the site has been about honesty, transparency. And from the get-go, when we set up the site, you could read about who we are, the founders. We're not incognito behind a mask or a fake social media account. Literally the whole thing for us was like, let's just go and show these people that we've got decades of experience between us. We've eaten our own dog food for a year and a half, made some decent money out of it. And if you want to try it, you can. And it's really that simple.
Yeah, there's many things that appeal to the consumer about what you offer on that front. And let's get into that then. Let's explore. We've talked about what sharp betting is, but what does it provide? You've got obviously football, you've got horse racing model, but just give a brief overview of what a member can expect to get, because there's a free model and there's also a paid model, right?
Exactly. So I'm gonna we'll touch on the other stuff probably a bit later, but I'm going to focus on the football service, and it consists of two elements. So one is a daily service that provides just a handful of bets, singles or ACCAs, across dozens of bookmakers that we have in our live feed. And this is a free curated service, and that has returned 12% ROI since inception back in August 2024. It also comes with a Telegram service, so members can make sure they don't miss out on the bets as much as that is possible with the moving prices and whatnot. Sometimes it's going to be inevitable. We might put out a price at 2.7. By the time you've logged on, it's 2.5. That will happen, but more often than not, it doesn't happen. If you miss a price, doesn't matter. There will be another one tomorrow. The free service, we try and do at least 100 bets a month. There's plenty to get stuck into. And again, if that's not satisfying you for your sort of what the bets you want to get on, then we have a sharp premium service. And that gives you literally direct live access to the model that is updated in real time, 24/7, 365 days a year. And in the live service, there's often hundreds of value bets across all the bookmakers and all the leagues that we cover. So even if a member has been restricted with certain sports books, we like to think there is still something for them in the feed. And we're constantly adding new books to the feed as well. So it's always an evolving thing. But so there's two approaches. The free approach, where you literally take what we put out on a daily basis and you can interact with the Telegram bot, or you upgrade to Sharp Premium and you've got freedom to use the service as you choose.
Yeah, that's a good overview there. And we did look at David's Daily. That's almost like the benchmark. We had, like say, over 2,500 bets and an impressive ROI of 12.54%. We also looked at, different aspects of staking and banking, and we looked at a couple of the blogs that you've done on your Road to 8K and a different blog looking at small stakes. And we'll talk about that staking approach a bit later on. But I also wanted to ask you about, with the David's Daily service, as a snapshot, as an overview, and obviously people can then go to the Sharp Premium to get more bets every day. But one thing you have done really well with on the David's Daily is using multiples, especially in 2025. If you look at the average odds, we can see they've increased.
Yes.
And this theory of using multiples works on a couple of approaches, doesn't it? It works from the approach of, compounding value, because if you take two singles, which are value together as a multiple, then you compound that. But also as a way of camouflaging your bets with bookmakers, because multiples are so much harder to benchmark as coming from somebody that's profitable and sharp.
Pete, I mean, I don't need to answer the question. That's exactly right. So 100%. So Chris jokes with me that for the David's Daily, he's like, how come you're so good at picking these selections in the multis? There's no magic one there. I'll sometimes just put a handful of singles. I'll do a patent, a fourfold, a lucky 15. And literally, this is what I'm asked in the onboarding sessions is what is the logic that goes into you picking an ACCA? And all I do is I focus on, so there are red bets and green bets. Red bets are the higher value bets. So I mainly focus on the red bets. I drop in a few green bets. They're great to sort of pad out a multiple with a green bet. I keep my maximum odds to sort of a reasonably low level of like maybe 3.5 decimal odds to manage the variance. And I pick games that are as close together as possible so the settlement is not drawn out. I don't want to have a fourth leg that's 11 hours after 3 legs of one, otherwise that would just be too stressful. So that's kind of it. It takes me a couple of minutes a day to pick these selections based on those criteria. I don't overthink it at all. So it's literally a case of the feed has got so many bets in there. I apply those little bits of logic and that allows me to get those multiples. And Pete, the multiples is so significant. As you say, I said I don't need to answer the question, but I am going to answer it again because it is the most important thing I think we'll talk about today. If a sports book in the modern world needs to make such a big percentage off each customer that they want you to place multiples. Because if you're placing negative EV multiples, you're compounding the value in their direction. So they want you to place these bets on these. They want you to use bet builders and accumulators. Their high margin products are the things that they lead you to. And if you do the opposite of that and you hit them with short price singles and you race to a double figure ROI in quick time, they're not going to take too kindly to that. That is why it's so important that multiples are part of a sharp better strategy. Because as you say, not only are you compounding your value to enhance that ROI, but you are doing ostensibly what the bookmaker wants you to do. So yeah, it really is a win-win in that regard.
Yeah, I always like to think it's worth putting yourself in the shoes of the trader that might be in the risk department. And what they're more likely going to go for, they're going to look at people betting on singles, beating Betfair SP, beating the closing line. They're going to look for people who took standout bets and standout prices, which are singles. And then once they've done that, they might look at the multiples. They'll look at the 2 legs first, and then they'll look at those. So you just further down the likelihood that you're going to get spotted by a trading director. So that all makes sense. I was going to ask, because obviously people are using David's Daily as a kind of benchmark and wondering how you do it. Do you do any, I imagine you don't do any research about the teams? The model fires up some teams from, I don't know, Eastern Europe or Asia. Do you do any light research into them at all? Or you just, thinking there's an edge, multiple, next one?
Nope. Because I'm quite busy, I do it as quickly as I possibly can. Now and then I will add a bit of David Hipkin, a sprinkling of little something or other, but it adds no value in terms of the edge is coming from the model. The only thing I might do is look for something that I know is interesting. There's an interesting fixture coming up, or there's like a manager's been fired, or something just a bit that's topical. But in terms of like me adding any value to the edge, no, that is 0. And I mix it up. So I think today we put a fourfold out that was, there's some under 21 stuff in there. Some, if you're trying to find bets on a Tuesday morning, it's not going to be the highest caliber football. So that's fine. You want to get a fourfold on, let's do it. But tonight we've got champions. So tonight's update, it's got 3 Champions League games in. Now, for something like that, I could go and obviously do a lot of research and try and add some value. But again, I never pretend to be a football expert. This is entirely a systematic approach.
No, it's important to relate that, I think, because people might assume that you have some kind of knowledge from your background and experience, but it's not the case. You're just picking out and showing this is how you do it. And the other point you made there is you're looking at bets that settle on the same day. And that's key when it comes to betting turnover, because if you have a bankroll and half your bets are still tied up, you probably can't bet as much as you would like. So again, just some simple strategies there to maximize your turnover.
Absolutely.
Before I move on to some of the other topics, how do you, there's maybe a question I need to put to Chris, but I assume he's always looking at his models, checking on the edge, because we've seen models have their edges eroded once that's into the public domain almost, but that's not a concern for you, or is it just something that you constantly monitor?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating as well, because it's a great question. At what point does variance become edge erosion? And so for David's Daily, I had a losing month in August just gone. I had complete faith that, that was variance rather than anything to do with the long-term edge. And I was aware that during August, it's summer, everyone's on holiday. I only put out about 60 bets during August, and, it's peak summer. So it was a quiet month, but rather than fear that I had a losing month, I doubled down, and for September and October, I put out 400 bets over those 2 months. So I really increased the activity in order to just get out of that period of variance. And, we're early November now, and just end of October, it turns out it was one of the best months we had. So yeah, we're always keeping an eye on that. But what is interesting is that, and this isn't giving away secret sauce, because anyone who's ever worked in betting will know this, all things being equal, and speaking in very general terms, most of the time, you'll find value in the boring side of a betting market. So punters want things to happen. They want to see goals.
Yeah.
So most of the time, if you had to take a bet, you'd be taking the no side of BTTS, and you'd be taking the unders in the goal line. And we put both sides of the market out. So our BTTS, yes, and our overs is a very strong performing market, but they are rarer than the other side of the market. So it seems that in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of goals in our coverage. So what looks like short-term variance, given that we do have a sort of that bias towards the negative side of the market, the market that isn't that exciting, when you get a period of lots of activity, that can look like a bad run. But again, that has been happening according to our results for the last month. But like I said, October's had one of the best performing months for David's Daily. When you hit a multiple and you get enough bets down, those patterns you can ride out.
That's right. It's really important. I think that one of the facets of our review was we were looking at I think you started with £300 and you grew it to 1,300. And someone might just casually look at that and go, oh, well, that's easy. That's £1,000 there. But actually, when you dig into the graph and look into the performance, there was a substantial period of time where you did nothing. And actually you went up, I think, to 800, dropped back down to 400 and stayed there for a while. And then a bunch of bets actually won. But you had to consistently do it for a few months. And obviously you're only doing a couple of bets a day, but you had to consistently do it for a few months to see those rewards. So I think sometimes people don't quite understand, they look at the final picture and go, oh, that's really easy to do, I'm going to replicate it. But when you're actually doing it day by day, and then you're looking at small numbers, small data samples, it can give you the wrong signal.
Yeah, you're talking about the live trial I did over August, September.
Yes.
What was fascinating to me is when you sent me the report of that with that graphic. I hadn't seen that graph before. I didn't know that was my journey, because previously I document everything, I track everything. But for that particular period of betting, you can see it all in the videos that I've posted on the site. I just logged in, had a bet at a casino, drank a cup of coffee, bet for 10 minutes, logged out. And I did that for a few days, and then I stopped and did it again a month later. And I didn't even look back and see, I was aware when an ACCA had landed, but I wasn't aware of having like particularly bad days or super successful days until I saw your graph. I was like, oh yeah, that was a roller coaster. But what I learned when I did the road to 8,000, the first blog I wrote a couple of years ago, I placed 5,000 bets to get that 8,000. That took me 100 hours. Okay, so I made $8,000 in 100 hours. That's 80 quid an hour. So I spent 100 hours at my computer betting. Now, that's what I talked about again. That's not actually that much time. That was like 45 minutes a day on average. Now, when I see the variance in that blog, there were periods where, I could lose 20 bets in a row. I could win 20 bets in a row. Now, in isolation, losing 20 bets in a row is horrific. But what I did is, for the blog, I'd record everything. But for my own sort of mindset, I reduced everything down to 10 data points. So when I reduced everything down to 10 data points, it's basically a straight line of profit. And that ultimately is what I need to care about. The long-term results are all that matters, and the sort of how you get there, and the rocky roads and the peaks and the troughs that you have to experience. When you look back, they don't matter.
That's true. Brings to mind when I was younger, my grandfather used to have logged the share price of his portfolio every day. He'd go and see facts. And I remember sitting there as a youngster, helping him in his book, and he'd know the value of his portfolio and its oscillations on a daily basis. I don't think that helped him make potent decisions, about where he should be investing his money, because he was making them based on very short-term form.
Absolutely. And so me sort of having been a sort of power user of our system now, in that trial with the graph that you showed me, I wasn't even sort of checking my results on a daily bet. I was sort of just comfortable with the system. But that's because I know who's built it. I've used it. And I completely understand that a member of our site will want to be more savvy in their own bet tracking. But again, one of the things that we get asked is, should we write down every single bet? And I don't think that's necessary. To do your own sort of analysis in a spreadsheet, I think is a waste of time, because I'd rather spend that time placing an extra bet than doing a data entry task. But I fully understand that people will want to keep their own record.
This podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange. When it comes to betting exchanges, Matchbook has been my personal go-to for some time now. Using horse racing as an example, they've offered the best prices on the most runners this year, which can make a big difference to your bottom line. Plus, with an industry-leading score of 4.2 on Trustpilot, you know you're in safe hands. Download the Matchbook Betting Exchange app or go to matchbook.com today. And if you enter the code SBC150, that's SBC150 on sign up, you can get commission free for your first 150 days, which can give you even more value. If you need to place a larger or more bespoke bet, or are indeed a corporate or operator client, their brokerage service is excellent and available 365 days a year. For more details, email the team at brokerage@matchbook.com. Matchbook Betting Exchange is for bettors who know better. You obviously have got a bit of community now at Sharp Betting, and you do regular clinic calls with members. Does this topic come up quite regularly about variance, about some of the topics we talked about, how you select bets, but especially the variance question? Is that something that a lot of people seem to struggle with?
Not really. The very first thing that we get asked is, can you give the exact percentage? So I know, so at the moment we group bets into red or green. They're either high value or regular value. And people want to know what the actual number is that we think for each bet. But the simple reason for us not sharing that is the tragedy of the commons would lead to everyone filtering to what you would end up with, a bet of the day, and all our members having the same footprint. And that benefits no one. So that would be the main question. The second question would be, what is the difference between green and should I be betting the greens?
Yeah.
And since we're talking about, my answer to that is, yeah, absolutely. I bet the greens to pad out multiples, but if you're looking for a single, probably stick with the reds. But yeah, the greens are still value, but they will potentially add to the variance. And then also, like, on the onboarding sessions, they're great because I can sort of say things to people informally that I perhaps wouldn't say to a wider audience. And something like that might be, if you look at some of our 1x2 prices, we've got quite a good strike rate at hitting 30-1 upsets in the football 1x2 and so on. But I wouldn't say that was necessarily a strategy. And I think it's similar to one of your recent reports on us. It's like, if you keep your maximum odds to, like I said earlier, like 3.5 or lower, you might be doing something there that is enhancing your ROI rather than just taking everything. So those are sort of the main sort of 2 or 3 things that are covered in those sessions.
No, that's interesting to learn. And it's as people get into your platform and how they can maximize it. One of the things that we did like about Sharp Betting, and I have liked for some time, is the way you position it. Because we're talking about smaller stakes, Sharp Betting, but smaller stakes. And I think it's really important. We obviously live in an era of budget cuts and affordability from a betting point of view as well. And that contrasts quite neatly with, we might say, I hate the term influencers, but you see people pretending to be influencers. Maybe they are, they probably aren't, saying, I've got $5,000 on a horse racing bet, I've had a lump job on this one, and putting forward this idea that to be successful at betting, you need to be betting 4 figures, 5 figures, and having big balls and putting big cash bets down. Reality is quite different, isn't it? And I think that's one of the things I really like about what you do. How important was it for you and Chris to make sure that your site was affordable and allow people betting at tenors to make a profit from their betting?
So, Pete, I think that is absolutely spot on. Now, there is a lot of ego around betting, and I'm perfectly happy to share that, yeah, we've had this success, but also, like, I don't mind being a small punter. And like, I've been doing this for a long time, but if I think back to myself as a 20-year-old who started betting and doing okay from it, the good year for me back then would be a couple of £1,000, and a couple of £1,000 in a year. That meant an awful lot to me. It meant I could enjoy certain luxuries without the guilt that I couldn't afford, otherwise. And, for example, I would get a taxi home from a night out instead of the bus, or I'd go to a decent restaurant for date night rather than the local pub. So things like that, like, it was a significant life-changing amount of money on a small scale. And that's absolutely fine. We don't want to encourage people to set up a membership because they want to retire early. One of the first emails I got when we set up the business is literally somebody, I can say, because there are plenty of teachers around, he was a teacher and he said he wanted to give up his job and become a professional gambler. and he wanted to use sharp betting to do that. That was literally within a week. And that was a real sort of eye-opener to me, that we want people to come to this with knowing what their level is. So certainly for me, in my early 20s, if I could make a grand or two, given the sort of pretty reasonable subscription charges we have on the site, I think, the ability to finish a year with a couple of grand in your pocket to extend your holiday, pay for your Christmas bills, get a new watch, whatever it is, that is a market I am very keen on introducing the website to. Now, of course, if you want to try and emulate what Chris did, and he literally won 100 grand in a year. Now, if you want to try and do that, then that's your prerogative. The site provides the same information that Chris had, but that's certainly not something that I would actively sort of encourage as a goal from our website. And I think our price points and the options available on the website do reflect that.
And I think that's really important and key, like say in the current era we're living in, that it's an option for people. And everyone has to start somewhere, right? Everyone places their first bet. That teacher probably just needed to make £500 or a few grand, if you like, in his first year, and then scale it up from there. And maybe in 5 years' time, he might decide he wants a professional gambler. Yeah. He might decide he doesn't like it. He's not cut out for it. And I think, that there's very, very few people that can become a professional gambler and sustain it. And I think it's very realistic to think, well, you can make at least a few £100, if not more, especially given the range of bookmakers available. Because I think that's the other point as well, and we'll probably talk about restrictions and closures, is that you can bet on these games with so many legal bookmakers. It must be added. So there's lots of options. Even if Denise closes you down, you can go and join any myriad of other UK licensed books and they'll have the same market.
Yeah.
So, and that's the other key point, isn't it? Because we should talk about restrictions and closures, and that's where stakes allow you the way you operate in terms of you don't need to bet a lot. You just bet a lot of bets at smaller stakes, and these bookmakers are offering it, and that high turnover approach actually works. And I want to ask you though about part of that is priming accounts.
Yeah.
Because you've done some videos on this material. Could you explain what you mean by priming and any tips you might have on how you can prolong the life of a betting account while following a system like yours?
Yeah, so I think I said it earlier in the chat, the jury is out about how important priming is of an account. So another word is camouflage your bets. But for me, I think there is no downside to look as recreational as possible. And certainly I was doing that with all my betting activity. I try and look recreational. I mean, it gets quite absurd, really. I will even spell hello wrong when I go to a customer service email or something. I want them to...
That's a good one.
I want them to think the worst of me. And does this stuff work? Well, when we were betting at scale, we were getting invited to VIP clubs left, right and centre. We didn't have a losing month in 18 months, by the way. So we had 18 winning months in a row. We were invited to VIP clubs. We were getting £1,500 per month in free bets while we were winning. So the priming stuff I think is important. I'll just go through a list of things and people can decide for themselves how important they think these are. But for me, it's absolutely download the app. They all have app. Most must be more than 80% of bets are probably placed on mobile these days. So get that app and use it. Make sure you bet at least amongst your first few bets in play. That makes it look like it's a spontaneous decision. Make sure you use some cashing out features. Very rarely good value when you cash out. Use their bet builder. They put that front and center for a reason. So make sure you use a bet builder product. Make sure you bet on the top tier stuff, not just any sort of low tier where they're more likely to find value. Also, this is a key one. Take worse price than is available elsewhere.
Yeah.
You don't want to look price sensitive. We've seen recently what happens when you can look too price sensitive. So if your book is offering 2.6 when it's generally 2.5, don't bet it. Go and find 2.4 somewhere. And then, do use the slots and the casino for small stakes, just to look like you're just an all-round punter. And then obviously the final thing that we've said several times already is bet the multiples. And the multiples is not just the sharp betting multiples that we throw up, but also just throw in look at the Premier League at a weekend and just back all the favourites in a fourfold. And just, you're not going to lose that much by doing that. So, it's things like that. Some of these decisions, ostensibly they're not plus EV decisions that you're making, but in terms of getting your account to last longer, they actually will help your EV in that regard. So those are some of the things that I would certainly encourage.
And I think in the same magazine, which we have the Sharp Betting review, I posted about my own experience as a VIP and a new account that I had. I placed a different approach to priming. I placed a bunch of ARBs on some high level markets. And I think 8 out of 10 lost.
Yeah.
And from there, I got a lot of rope with that bookmaker and also got offered a VIP, which was soon rescinded once, I started betting what I wanted to. But and it doesn't always work. Sometimes these approaches don't work. Some bookmakers are clued up to it or just a little bit better than others. But certainly it can add some extra options to you, especially if you have that time and ability and you think, this account's very valuable to me. I don't want to lose it in 2 days.
Yeah, so for the first thing I would do when I did the road to 8,000, what I would do is I'd pull up 3 soft bookmakers. I'd look at the 1x2 for the big match tonight, and I'd back the 1x2 with the worst prices for all of them. So I was getting the worst price, but I would do it in a way that I was kind of just paying the margin. So whatever outcome occurred, I'd pay my commission for the bet, but not really lose that much. So, but I mean, that was quite a sort of convoluted way of trying to break even or as close to while priming and looking price insensitive. I don't think it's necessary to go that far, but some people might want to do that. Certainly it's very easy to do it. In a tennis match, or an over under goal line, you can certainly find, these pick 'em lines and just take, there might be even money on both sides, but just take the 1.91 on both sides, take the hit, but look price insensitive and kind of break even bar the margin.
Yeah, I heard someone else talk about this recently and how they rotate their accounts. They'll win a certain amount with each one over the course of a month. They'll have a target. Let's say that target is £500. They hit that target with a bookmaker. They'll start then putting some non-sharp action through it before it gets limited. And there's just different approaches to it. In my mind, I think I should do a priming special because I'd love to tap into not just your brain, but so many other guests that I've had on in the past, because I think that everyone's got a different approach. And what you're saying there, I'm like, I might try that. And whenever I speak to other people, they have similar ideas.
Pete, that's actually something I'm festering at the moment, is the power of fake dormancy on a longevity. So what I am doing is something similar to that person you just mentioned, is like, if I have a great start to the month and I'm in profit for a few £100 in the first week, I'll leave that, but I'll just place a few casino bets and won't do any more sports betting for like 3 weeks, just so I trigger the dormancy alert, which makes them sort of come running to me rather than the red flag alert that puts me in the wrong bucket. So I'm sort of having a look at that as well. Don't know if there's anything in it, but it's something I'm looking at.
Exactly. I just imagine, you get an email saying, hey, we miss you. How bookmakers send you that message? We miss you. Come back and play in our casino. I'm like, okay.
Exactly.
Here's a special offer. Yeah. So it's really interesting. And we could probably do a special on this topic alone, I imagine. Let me ask you about exchanges, though, because I think this is a topic, and maybe even sharp bookmakers, the likes of, whether it be Asian books or Pinnacle or what have you. How are people using sharp betting on exchanges? And is that something you've been advising, helping people with?
Yeah. It's again, you'll see on the website, we don't advertise it as something that can beat an exchange. It's not designed to beat the exchanges. I did about 1,000 bets on the exchange over the summer. I finished 1.7% up, and I sort of knocked it on the head for the time being. Chris and I to discuss it, and it's designed to beat the soft books. So I think we'd sort of put people off trying to bet exclusively on the exchange. Obviously, it would be a superb thing if we did beat the exchange, and we would be doing that ourselves, and also the service would cost a lot more. So yeah, it's a short answer. Love to know if people have got any angles using sharp betting on the exchanges, but yeah, it's not what the product's designed for.
Makes sense. That's just a question I had to ask. I wanted to ask, there's 2 aspects of effectively being public with this. I think you've got the community aspect of sharp betting, people knowing who you are, and that camaraderie you have with members, that helping other people. But then you also have the downside of that, which is trolls, reaction on social media, people posting in disbelief about your edges and whether you are as good as you say you are. How do you cope with that? And what do you think it says about the betting world, if you like? Or is it just what people are like these days?
Yeah, do you know what? I really don't mind. Like, some of these people behave online in a way that I have never once experienced in real life. So it's not something I lose any sleep over. The fact is, I've been doing difficult things for my entire life, and dealing with a stranger saying things online that they probably wouldn't say in real life is actually incredibly easy in comparison. So, and also, for every negative comment I get way more DMs from people saying, why are you replying to that person? Or I love the way you replied to that person. So I'm actually entertaining more people than I'm annoying. And it's quite fun. I didn't think it would be an issue when we set up the site. I'm kind of the front man of the site. I put my head above the parapet. I wasn't expecting so many people to have a default position of negativity. But like I say, they are outnumbered, I would say, 1,000-fold by positivity. So it's not something that bothers me. And I think what is very interesting is that in real life, if you ever meet someone and you're struck by how impressive they are as an individual, you never go away from that meeting saying, I really like that guy, really impressed by him. I bet he goes home and gives abuse to strangers online. That just doesn't happen. So it's not the impressive people who are giving abuse online. Who is it then? So it doesn't bother me at all. And also, I'm completely transparent in the fact that if anyone has a genuine question about anything that we've done or that we've said or that we publish, I will happily respond to them. And I've shown that time and time again, and I'll do it. I have no concern talking to anyone either via DM or message or email, or even, like I say, a face-to-face conversation to get to the bottom of whatever their issue is. But anyone who's sort of not necessarily trolled me, but sort of accused me of something, when I said to them, come on, let's just talk about it. Let's do a quick Google meet and I'll answer all the questions you've got. They run a mile. So it's absolutely fine.
Just that it's a refreshing approach. And as someone who's had the pleasure of sharing a beer with you, I can say, it's always been very enjoyable getting to know you and obviously being in your company. As the same for Chris. And yeah, you get that sense that just if you can have a beer with someone and enjoy it, I think that's always a good barometer for what they're, to do business with or to have them on your podcast.
I believe that in absolute everything, like in business, in politics, the beer test is very, very important. And it's particularly in politics right now, that have a beer test is very revealing.
I think so. So tell me what's in the pipeline for sharp betting, because you've done a lot in a short space of time. And we haven't even really talked about the racing and the tennis and other aspects of what you have on offer and are building. But what can subscribers or followers look forward to in the next few months or years?
The short answer to that is we're just going to have a bit of a break now. We've been working so hard since the site went live to members this year. Yeah, I just want to enjoy a bit of time off over Christmas and we'll keep doing what we're doing. And, I absolutely think people should follow us online and Twitter, but, and who knows what's coming in 2026. There's certainly going to be some things, but yeah, for now, it's focused on what we're doing, building the football service. Tennis is certainly something we're interested in, but given the priorities with what is our bread and butter, we're still sort of focusing on the football and the horse racing side of things. But yeah, we've got tons of boxing coverage as well. So watch this space for 2026.
Well, even if you don't do anything else, I think there's a plethora of content and good information available on the Sharp Betting site as it is. And obviously encourage people to go and read the SBC review where we go into detail. We also have, before I kind of ask you the final question, also have a special deal running till the end of November 2025. So recording this early November, it'll probably go out in a week or so. So you'll have a few weeks at that point if you're not yet to do so. If you are an SBC member, I think you can save, it's £150 for a year through SBC for Sharp Betting Premium. And it's £12.50 a month comparative. And we've talked about the edges and you can oversee them in that review. But I'm very surprised if, even with following David's deal, you can't make a good return on that subscription. So go check that out. So David, finally, before we wrap up, we've talked a lot about Sharp Betting, but what one piece of advice would you give someone considering joining Sharp Betting to get the best results?
It's a broken record now, but it's longevity, focusing on longevity and using the multiples to exploit the compounding effect of the edge. And, like you say, with the discount that you guys have got, whatever that monthly rate is, it's a couple of cups of coffee a month. Now, if you start slowly and disciplined, you can be in a situation, but by within that month, you can start to be playing with the house's money and start to scale up your stake. Now, if you start slowly, it's a win-win situation, because if you start slowly in terms of the stake I'm talking about and you do really well, you'll wish that you had staked more and you'll be prepared to stake more because you're using the house's money now. If you start slowly and you have a bad first month, you'll be glad you started slowly because you will have lost less than if you started aggressively. So I really think that's just a long-term mindset approach. Start slowly, get familiar with the habits you need to build and the ebbs and flows in the system, and just see it as a long-term thing. And I think that's super important. In terms of the other thing that we talk about on the site, and I know that you cover the difference between flat staking and sharp staking. Now, there are different reasons why they can be used, and I don't want to get into detail here because it's very nicely covered in your latest issue. But for me, I don't overthink that. So to create the correct sharp stake is, again, just something that would take a little bit longer in your bet placement. So for me, I would suggest pulling up some of my videos from the website, and you'll see my approach to staking. Sometimes I'm literally just saying I'm having a £5 on that, £6 on that, £3 on that, £5. In the long run, it really doesn't matter about being too over detailed, over precise about the staking, because again, once you get into the long run, whether you're flat staking or sharp staking, the ROI is going to be on your side.
There you go. Well, it's been a really enjoyable hour or so with you, David, and thank you for your time. And thank you for letting us explore sharp betting. Thank you for the wisdom that you shared today. And before we wrap up, we obviously talked about you are very open and happy to talk with people. Do you want to fire out some contact information, website links, whatever it might be?
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Great to talk to you too. And I think if you Google David Football Betting, I think you'll actually find me. So that's kind of simple. We're on X. We've got like 12,000 followers on X, so do join us there. And if you mentioned the betting bug interviews I do, we've done almost 50 interviews this year with various folk from the betting community. So our YouTube is growing. We're nearly at 1,000 subscribers there. So do follow us, subscribe there. And Twitter, YouTube, X. And obviously you can email us, and any questions, more than happy to speak to anyone face to face about any questions they may have.
Great stuff. Well, there you go. And I think you've earned a well-deserved rest, David. Like you mentioned, you've done a lot. You've been quite prominent, and I think you deserve to sit back a little bit and enjoy what you've built. So thank you so much for coming on. I wish you all the best with sharp betting, and look forward to seeing how it progresses.
Thanks a lot, Pete. You too. Take care.